Okay, good morning. Hello, and thank you for joining us for MEFA's webinar, Financial Aid 101 for School Counselors. My name is Jennifer Bento-Pinion. I'm here at MEFA on the college planning team, and we'll be moderating today's session. We are delighted and honored to have Susan Beard with us as our guest speaker this morning, and Susan will introduce herself in just a moment. But first, let's just go through some of the logistics for this webinar. Everyone is on mute. And the chat feature is not available. So if you have questions, we request that you type those into the QA. So we'll be monitoring the questions as we go along and answering anything. I'll be answering anything behind the scenes and bringing some to Susan to answer live as well. So if you need closed captioning, just press the little CC button at the bottom of your screen to get that live transcript. We are recording the session, so if you have to leave, no worries. We'll be following up with an email with the recording and the slides, so you can reach out to us with further questions. So this session is also part of the MEFA Institute, which is MEFA's way of sharing our content with our counselors, our community-based organizations, our college administrators that support students. So if you check out our offerings on MEFA.org/MEFA-Institute, you can see all of our live and recordings, and those are eligible for PDP points. And we'll be sharing all that. You didn't have to write down that website there. We'll be sharing that after as well. So just a little bit about MEFA. We are in our 40th year of helping families plan, save, and pay for college. So we have a state savings plan, prepaid tuition plan, low-cost loans, no-cost college and career planning web portal, MEFA Pathway. So we offer guidance and support for our educators, students, and families at whatever stage of the game you're at. Okay, so now I will hand it over to Susan, and she will share her expertise around financial aid. Thank you, Susan.
Good morning, everyone. Just going to put up a little slide here on how to participate. Jennifer went over most of the things. Our chat is disabled, but I do hope you have lots of questions because we have lots of answers, or we'll do our best to do that. My name is Susan Beard, and I am the Director of Student Financial Services at Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. I have to qualify that. Sometimes we are mistaken with Illinois, but here in New England, it's pretty common. We are in Norton, Massachusetts on this very foggy morning. My hair was curly an hour ago, and it's not anymore, but I am so thankful to MEFA for inviting me to share today and to help spread the word on how financial aid works. Some of you probably know a lot of this stuff, and some of you may not know much of it, but I hope at the end all of you get some kind of goodness out of it and have some of your questions answered. And yeah, so without further ado, we'll get going. Like Jennifer said, MEFA is a wonderful organization, nonprofit. They've been in business for a long, long time, very reputable. We love them. Families love them. College administrators just depend on MEFA for great partnerships in all that we do. I will be talking a lot about financial aid. So the types and the sources and where the money comes from, how your students and families are going to apply for financial aid, how the college administrators make those crazy decisions that we make. Some things are in our control and some things are not. How you can, or how families are learning how they can pay for college. And then we'll talk a little bit about some free resources at the very end of the seminar. So what is financial aid? It's money to help pay for college. You already probably know that. But some families are sometimes surprised. They think about financial aid as just scholarships and grants, but really it's a three-legged stool, if you will. Financial aid is grants and scholarships, money that does not have to be paid back. But it also encompasses work study, or an availability for students to work on campus and earn some money to put towards their college expenses. And then the federal student loans are also under the financial aid umbrella. And that's where a lot of families are surprised, or we talk to them and they say, oh, well, I don't want loans. I just want financial aid. We explain that it's all sorts of different funds make up the financial aid umbrella or fall under the umbrella. So financial aid comes from a number of different places. The federal government, of course, is one. They provide grants, loans, student loan program. There are tax incentives for families to benefit from. The state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're very fortunate in this part of the country. They have a lot of programs for our families, grants and scholarships, waivers for tuition, depending on the colleges that they attend. And there's a website here that you can go to learn more about those programs. The colleges and universities all over the country have lots and lots of financial aid, depending on the size of the college, the endowment of the college, the age of the college. They have millions of dollars that generally are given on both need-based and merit-based systems, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then other agencies, outside scholarships, local organizations. MEFApathways.org has a wonderful area in which you can look and see, or your families can look and see, where they can search for other types of scholarships. So we're going to start with loans. Loans are in the news a lot, and maybe even some of you will be benefiting from the new loan forgiveness program, which is wonderful. But it all started, or it starts in the financial aid office, where students and families are given loans as part of their financial aid award. They are never mandatory. Make sure your students know that. They are an option for them to borrow. Students are the loan borrowers, even if they're not 18. We get that question a lot. Sometimes, seniors are 17 when they're starting college. They can still borrow in their own name. No credit check is involved. Loans both come in subsidized and unsubsidized versions. So basically, subsidized means the government subsidizing the income while the students are in school. Unsubsidized means the opposite, that the interest will accrue while students are enrolled in school. For this upcoming year, 22-23, the interest rate is pretty low. It's 4.99, just under 5%. So we're still operating at a very good interest rate compared to other kinds of loans, personal loans, credit cards, certainly. And the benefits are plenty for federal loans. So we in the financial aid offices at colleges and universities are always telling our families and students to borrow federal loans, and make sure that you compare, or they compare, the financial interest rates to private loans and companies that may charge more than the federal government. There is a maximum that you can see on the slide. Freshman year, all the first year students can borrow up to $5,500. That goes up slightly sophomore year, junior year, and then senior year it repeats at $7,500. And this is always a question that families ask us about. What is my, I'm afraid to borrow $5,500 that first year. That'll just multiply out, and it could. Then again, they don't have to take it, but on average, the total debt that students are taking or could take is between $32,000 and $34,000 for a 4-year undergraduate degree. We immediately follow that up with, but the programs are good. They have lots and lots of repayment options, and you can go into for deferment if you go to graduate school. If you don't have a job, you can get forbearance, and there's all sorts of counseling available. In fact, students have to do a federal entrance counseling session before the loans are dispersed. So not to get too bogged down on that, but there's lots of resources for students, and we don't go into it lightly when we award our students loans. So be sure to pass that along to mostly parents, I think, that are anxious about that. Merit-based scholarships. So I mentioned really briefly earlier, colleges and universities will have scholarships and grants. Some are based or awarded on meritorious accolades that students earn, and some are based on need. So to talk about the merit-based first, it means that students are given grants or a scholarship based on their academic achievements, their musical ability, their athletic talents. These scholarships may or may not be renewable. So you want to make sure that your families are aware what is the criteria to have these scholarships year after year. Sometimes there's a separate application. Sometimes it's just based on the admission application. So families should be aware of that. And deadlines, of course, are always important. And I'm going to say deadlines a lot throughout this presentation because they are, when it comes to money, deadlines are pretty critical. And then there's the need-based side of financial aid. And need is based on what families put on their financial aid applications. Need-based is basically eligibility. The need-based sometimes gets confused. I'll have lots of families tell me that they need a lot of money. And then I respond, well, let's see what you're eligible for. There is a standardized formula that all colleges and universities use to determine eligibility for federal and state financial aid. Institutions, colleges, and universities may have their own version of this standardized formula to allocate their need-based grants and scholarships. There are criteria for need-based. One is financial, but also students have to be making satisfactory progress every year in order to keep maintaining their eligibility for financial aid. So we don't try to scare students with that, but there is a criteria that they have to maintain at least a certain GPA, and they need to be progressing. They can't just earn 1 credit every year for 10 years and keep getting financial aid. So we monitor that pretty closely. So let's talk about the application process. It is getting, I have to say, I think it gets easier every year between the federal government and colleges and universities and the CSS College Board. We're all trying to make this process less arduous, I think, year after year. And the FAFSA certainly has gotten simpler. First, by going online, a 6-page paper application has now turned into 100 or so questions online. And with skip logic involved, it does make it a little bit more accessible and easier, I think, for families to understand. But it still can be scary, right? And we have families and students that never complete because they're just frozen about applying. And I'm sure you've all met with students that just say, my parents don't know where to start, or I don't know where to start. And hopefully things you pick up today will encourage you to encourage them that it's not that scary. It's just step by step and you get through it. Again, deadlines are super important. Make sure your students are aware of the admission deadlines, early decision versus early action versus regular decision. All those deadlines can be different from school to school or college to college. Sometimes financial aid application deadlines mirror the admission application deadlines, and sometimes they don't. So a good old spreadsheet is really handy to keep track of all those things. Everything has to be submitted on time. And MEFA has a really cool application manager tool to help you keep those things organized. And you can see on the slide, the website's right there for you to access. FAFSA form, free application for federal student aid. You want to encourage your students to fill this out as quickly as possible after it's available to get it out of the way. Right now, the FAFSA, or a few years ago, actually, the FAFSA required the income that we use or we report on the FAFSA is not just last year's income, it's actually 2 years ago income. Income from 2 years ago, let me say that properly. All colleges and universities require this. So in just a few short weeks, the FAFSA for 2023-24 is going to be available for your seniors, for the senior class. Families, as you may know, need a FAFSA or an FSA ID, and that's probably the easiest part to do in this whole application process. You sign up for an FSA ID, both at least one parent and the student applicant needs to do that. And it's your name and your social security number and your birthday, and you get your ID that they will keep throughout the course of their whole financial aid lifetime, if you will. Parents, if they have an FSA ID for a prior child that's been in college, they can maintain or still use that same FSA ID for any of their children when they're filling out the FAFSA. Some of you may have seen the IRS data retrieval tool or learned about it, and this is how I comfort a lot of families in telling them when they do the FAFSA, at the click of a button, they can import their IRS tax data, so they don't even really have to know where their tax return is from 2021. We do recommend that they have it handy just in case there's a question on it, but with the data retrieval tool, it does make it so much easier. And of course, the FAFSA does have to be done every year. That's another question that sometimes families are surprised about. They think it's one and done, and it's not. It's every year that they have to report their income and assets on the FAFSA. Students do have to be U.S. citizens or or eligible non-citizens to receive federal financial aid, but parents do not. So if you do have families where the child or the student is a citizen or eligible non-citizen, their parents don't have to be. They can use zeros in the Social Security number section. They can't get that FSA ID, but you can print out a signature page. And every year we get a number of those. And it's a tiny little delay in the processing, but it's not prohibitive at all. We just print it out and we indicate that we have that signature for the FAFSA application. Colleges, that students or families do one FAFSA and put all the colleges that they want to receive the information on it. Parents will biological parents will report their information. When you have a family that's divorced or separated, you have a student who has a parents who are no longer married, the custodial parent will be the one to do the FAFSA form. If that custodial parent has remarried, their new spouse or the step parent also has to be included on the FAFSA. And that can be a little bit of a stumbling block for some families. They mistakenly think that it's just the custodial parent no matter what. And if that custodial parent is remarried or just got remarried or is about to be remarried, the new spouse will always have to be reported on the FAFSA as well. Parents who live together, even if they're not married, will still need to report their information on the FAFSA as well. And then another stumbling block that sometimes students have is who to report in their household as members of their household. They may have some family members that are sort of in and out, maybe older siblings who sometimes live there and sometimes they don't. It's the majority of the year coming up that is asked about. So I always tell families, when in doubt, if you think your older brother is going to be living in his bedroom still for next year and your parents are supporting him, include him in the household. And again, if they have questions, they can, there's a lot of help on the FAFSA website, and it'll actually explain how to define. We actually, on our own institutional app, which I'll talk about in a moment, but every year we get a family who reports, the two parents and a sibling, and then a family dog was reported last year, and their reasoning was the dog's insurance and money that they were spending was more than on their children. So I thought that was just nice for a little laugh, a momentary laugh. Additional information on the FAFSA, parent and student income. I mentioned before, 2021 income is reported. So that really makes it easier for your seniors who are applying to college in October and November of this year. We used to have to help them estimate their current year 2022 income, but now we're going back to 2021. IRS data retrieval brings in the information right from the IRS, so it's quite easy. Assets are reported to, both student and parent assets. You want to make sure that they report their savings and checking accounts, investments, other property, not their primary residence. The FAFSA does not care or ask about the family's primary residence. One of the biggest mistakes that families make, and it says here on this slide, do not include the home or the value of retirement and life insurance. One of the questions is how much on the FAFSA, how much do you contribute to your retirement program every year? And sometimes families interpret that as how much do you have in your retirement plan? So we want to make sure that those accounts are not reportable on the FAFSA form. And I think sometimes that puts families at ease to know that they don't have to report their their 401ks or their IRAs, and they don't have to report the value of their primary home, I think it makes them feel a little bit better that they've actually paid down their mortgage, or that they've put aside money for retirement. So that, I do find that that makes them feel better. What doesn't make them feel better sometimes is that debt is not reported on the FAFSA. So if they have a high mortgage, or if they have high credit cards, or a car loan, or anything that is considered consumer debt that is not reportable on the FAFSA. And Jennifer, if there are any questions, please make sure you pop in and let me know.
I will. Yes, we don't have any. You're doing such a thorough job.
So wonderful,
Thank
right?
you.
Or folks are still on their first cup of coffee, so that's fine too. In addition to the FAFSA, some colleges and universities, usually they are private schools, private colleges and universities will ask for other information other than, in addition to the FAFSA. So not to replace the FAFSA, but they'll say we need the FAFSA, and we also need what's called the CSS Profiles. It's a College Board product. Some colleges and universities require it. Like I said, it does cost a little bit to apply and use this tool for the financial aid application. So I always tell families to make sure that while the FAFSA is free and you can report first 10 colleges on the FAFSA, and then if your son or daughter has 10 more colleges, they can add that at a later date and it doesn't cost you anything. The CSS profile does cost a little bit of money to complete and to send to colleges. So you want to make sure that your students are not just randomly picking out lots of cool sounding schools to put on the CSS profile. You want to make sure that they're very pretty committed to those colleges in terms of applying. It costs $25 to register for their profile, and then each additional school costs $16. Now, in the College Board's defense, they haven't raised those prices in gosh, as long as I can remember. Those prices have stayed pretty consistent. So they are trying their best to not make it too cost prohibitive. In fact, there are fee waivers for certain families who make income of 100,000 or less. There are other criteria as well. And as the families go through the CSS profile, the logic will assess whether or not they have to pay at the end. So that's improved a lot over the years. Like the FAFSA, that's available in just a few weeks in October. Custodial parent and step parent, if applicable, will do the CSS profile. Some colleges, though, also want to know about that non-custodial parent in the child's life. And if it is obtainable, then the CSS profile has a application for them as well. Maybe, and probably some of you have students who say, well, my non-custodial parent is not around or available, or I don't want to get in touch with them. And all of those situations can be very delicate, and financial aid offices are pretty willing to listen to any types of those situations and waive the requirement for a non-custodial parent information if the situation warrants it. So again, we did find that some students weren't applying because they were just afraid to even enter that realm or talk about that with a financial aid counselor, or maybe even their guidance counselor. So do make sure that you are aware, or that you pass along the fact that a lot of colleges are willing to waive that non-custodial parent information if it's not obtainable. Unwillingness, though, is not a reason for us to waive. So we always have a few difficult conversations with families where the non-custodial parent is fully involved in that child's life, but they don't want them to go to a certain college, so they won't fill out the form. That goes for custodial parents too. You as guidance counselors may have some tough conversations with your students where the parents are either against the child going to college at all, or they really feel very strongly about a certain college they want their son or daughter to go to, or all those conversations. And I know you've had them, we've had them. They can be, like I said, delicate and challenging, but always try to help your students through that and find an alternative solution for them as best you can. And I meant to say some colleges, I mentioned that Wheaton's application, we had someone reported the dog on there. So some colleges will say, we need the FAFSA, we need the profile, and we have an institutional application for our own grants and scholarships. Many colleges have replaced the CSS profile with their own institutional application. So again, that spreadsheet that I talked about earlier is really helpful to keep track of deadlines and the applications that each college and university wants. After your students apply, what happens? That's always the critical question. What happens next after I send out all this information? Colleges and universities receive the results of the FAFSA and the CSS profile electronically. The students and families will receive verification that they filed their FAFSA with the student aid report. Usually it's email at this point. If they did file by paper, they would get a paper student aid report. It's really important that your students look over those results to make sure that one, all of the information they put on the FAFSA is correct. Two, if they need to make some corrections, maybe that big brother moved home again, they want to add him to the household. Maybe there was a typographical error when they were entering the FAFSA, they have the opportunity to correct it. Also, make sure that the students, the schools that they indicated or that they wanted to receive the applications are the ones that are on the FAFSA. Our CSS profile, we don't have that we don't use the profile anymore, but a few years ago we did, and Holy Cross in Worcester, we have very similar codes. And so we were constantly getting applications for each other's schools. So it was just a number transposition. So make sure that your students are getting the data to the correct schools that they intended. Colleges may in turn reach back out to students, to your students, and ask them for a little bit more information. And I do the eye roll because we get the eye roll. They've done a FAFSA, they've done a profile, they've done a institutional application, and then, oh my gosh, now you're asking me for a copy of my tax returns, really? Or you want to know how many people or how old I am? Try and reassure or encourage your students and their families to always respond to those questions. It's not because we're nosy, it's because we have to verify a certain number of applications each year. The government tells the colleges and universities which applications are selected for verification. Doesn't mean we don't like that applicant or that family, but it just means that it's been flagged by the government either randomly or sometimes there are reasons. We had a family report 22 members in their household, and that application was flagged for verification. They just wanted us to take a second look and make sure there were really 22 people, and turns out it was a single parent household. It was 2 people in the household with 1 child in college. So again, that's a slip of the wrist, I guess, in reporting, but that stuff like that is why applications are selected for verification. And this slide is just basically what I talked about.
Susan, could I interrupt you for
Please.
one quick moment? We
Sure.
had a good question come in. So do colleges still require a tax transcript during verification?
Great question. So by using the IRS data retrieval tool, I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, we will not have to ask for a tax transcript or a copy of the tax return. When we do, though, it's because a family did not choose to do that IRS data transfer. There are a few situations where families are not eligible to use that data transfer. If they filed an amended tax return, that sort of messes up the flow a little bit, and then we do have to ask for a transcript. And there's another reason why they can't use the transfer tool, but it's slipped my mind right now. But like I said, 8 or 9 times out of 10, using the data retrieval will eliminate that need for us to go and ask for that tax transcript.
Great, thanks, Susan.
Sure. In the financial aid office, make sure you relay to your students that and their families that we're a really good resource for answering questions and giving out information. Students, if they have a question about a particular college's deadline or process or available resources, we're the best place to find that out. So I do, and we try, financial aid offices, we try to make our websites friendly and now that we're back in person, we have candy in on our desks and all of that to encourage students and their families to approach us and to know that we're here to help them, to aid them, and not be a scary place. Families, parents, especially at this point while they're starting to apply, may need to relay special circumstances that, despite filling out hundreds of questions on the FAFSA and the profile, there's still a situation that isn't quite translatable in those forms. So it's sometimes helpful to speak with a person, either by Zoom or in person or over the phone or over email. And we as financial aid administrators really welcome those kinds of interactions. To interpret a FAFSA and an application is one thing, but then to really hear what's going on in a family's life or financial situation can help tremendously on both sides of the desk. I think it enables families to feel more comfortable that they're actually still human beings doing this job. And while we have all of these wonderful technology tools at our fingertips, we are still here to listen to families and to help them through the process. So encourage your families and your students, especially. I love when I hear from students and they say they have a question about their FAFSA. That means they're involved and they're aware of the financial aid part of it. We can tell, we being admission and financial aid, we can tell when parents write an essay, you guys know that, or they write us a letter or an email and they sign their student's name. We can tell. I just so appreciate when I can tell it's a student, and a lot of times it's a joint effort, and that's fine too, but it's the first step that students take to be independent in reaching out to these colleges and universities offices and asking questions for themselves. So help us help them to not be afraid to do that. So I'm going to take a quick sip of my coffee before we talk about how financial aid decisions are made. And I know you've had that question from families and students and parents and wondering yourselves maybe how on earth does Wheaton College award their financial aid? And I had an applicant go to Northeastern last year and they got this financial aid, but now I have an applicant at Northeastern this year and it's different financial aid. And how are we making those decisions? Some of it is very regimented and some of it depends on goals and priorities of the colleges in that particular year. So first we begin with our cost of attendance. How much does it cost for the college? And we build that cost of attendance or budget. You may hear us refer to it as that, as a combination of billed expenses and indirect non-billed expenses. So the billed expenses are things you're going to find on a bill. Tuition and fees, every student is going to be billed that. Some students who want to live at the college, they're residential, they will be billed also for room and board or a meal plan. But then students will also encumber non-billable things like books and supplies. Those are separate things that they need to get that won't be necessarily found on our college tuition bill. Transportation to and from the college. Families in Massachusetts that are applying to the University of Hawaii are going to have a lot of transportation expenses. Families in Massachusetts who are applying to Wheaton College or Worcester State are not going to have as much transportation costs. Of course, the price of gas is not awesome right now, but still nothing like getting on a plane and going to that college. So that is something that we encourage families to remember, that it's not just the tuition or the room and board expenses, but it's these indirect expenses too that can make up what it costs to go to college for the year. After we determine what the cost of attendance is at our colleges, we take the EFC, or expected family contribution. And this is always an interesting topic because the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, will determine, at least for one more year, what's called an EFC. It's the calculated amount that the family is theoretically supposed to absorb for 1 year of college. So we tell our families, this is what the formula says that you theoretically should be able to afford. It's not necessarily what you have in your checking account or your savings account. It's not something that you may be comfortable with, or it might be something that you can handle. It really depends on the family's situation. But that's where that's the basic first bottom of the barrel, if you will, that we start when we package a student's financial aid award. A wonderful tool that families should use so that they're not totally surprised is a calculator, an EFC calculator. MEFA has that on their website. You can Google it, families can Google it, and every college and university in the country has what's called a net price calculator on their website. So I love to tell families to go out to the colleges that they really, really want to go to and answer the questions on the net price calculator on the college's websites. That is an estimate that families can self-fill out forms. So it's not connected to the IRS database. It's not connected to any sort of database at all, or even the high school's transcripts or anything like that, but it's self-reported data that you can enter, and for your child, or the students can enter based on their income and their assets and their GPAs and their ranking class and their extracurricular activities to see if they were admitted to that college, what approximately would they qualify for in financial aid. It's a really great and helpful tool, and I think makes families feel a lot better about applying, so that they're not just wondering, I have no idea how this is going to turn out. So back to the formula. Cost of attendance, we subtract that calculated expected family contribution to determine their financial need or eligibility. And then we take that need or eligibility and we fill it with financial aid to the best that we can, to the best of our ability. Here's an example of a financial aid package. And this particular college costs $45,000. So it's a little more than a state school or university. It's probably a private school. The family filled out their FAFSA and their EFC is $5,000. So taking the cost of attendance of $45,000 and subtracting the family's contribution of $5,000, $40,000, can't even do my math right, $40,000 is the family's eligibility. And this particular college was generous in that they got $17,500 in a grant, $10,000 in a scholarship. Those student loans are factored in there, and then a job on campus, not mandatory, but it's an option. And then the college wasn't able to give fill all that they could in need. So there's actually some unmet need here. What that means is the family is going to be paying their expected family contribution of $5,000 plus the unmet need of $5,000. So really their EFC is now turned into, at this college, $10,000. Oh, here's a slide about the net price calculators. So like I said, every college has them. It's a really great tool. So I would encourage your students to look at those on their college's websites. It's important, and I bet many of you have seen the different kinds of financial aid award letters that students are bringing to you. And this is a great grid where a student or family has 3 colleges and they cost all about the same. They're all coming in at about $45,000, but they have 3 different award letters and their dollars are all over the place. So the EFC stays the same at all these colleges and their need will stay the same at all these colleges. So this family with the EFC of $5,000 needs $40,000 at every school they go to that costs this. But you can see in this grid that the first college A, it's awesome. They got a lot of grants and scholarships. Those student loans, you can see it stays consistent across that blue bar. The job on campus is also something that's consistent. But what's not consistent amongst colleges A, B, and C is the amount of grant and scholarship aid that they can afford. College A met their whole need, the family's need or the student's need. College B did okay. College C maybe they don't have a very big endowment, or they're just not able to give this particular child as much grant or scholarship that they need. So they have unmet needs. So in order to go to college C, that family is going to have to come up with not $5,000 of an EFC like at college A, but $20,000 because it's incorporating that unmet need as well. more than likely, your student sitting right in front of you is going to love College C the best. That's Murphy's Law. That's what happens. And that's when you say, let's get on the phone. Let's email financial aid. Let's email the admission office and see if there's additional merit scholarships that we can ask about. Always encourage families to reach out and to ask a question. One of the myths I was surprised to hear a number of years ago now, not much surprises me now, but a number of years ago, families were not reaching out because they were afraid that if they asked for more money, we would get mad and take money away from their financial aid packages. And I can honestly say, I don't know anybody in my financial aid circle or world that would do that. But I can understand that families, especially first generation families who have not ever gone through this process before, they can be very timid or nervous about asking the questions, but you as counselors help them feel confident and know that we have heard almost every question and we never feel that any of the questions are not worthy of being asked. So it always pays to reach out and ask questions of the colleges. Here's another grid that's helpful too. The types of awards can vary. So going back to this slide, in this particular slide, the grants and scholarships is what varied. The loans and work study stayed the same. This next screen, though, you'll see this new line, parent loans. So some colleges are actually building in an option for parents to borrow. It's important that your students and their families are aware that if you look at the bottom line on these three colleges, the total amount given, and I say that in quotes, given is $35,000. So a student might bounce into your office and say, look at all this money. I've gotten $35,000 to go to all of these schools. And you sit with them and you say, okay, well, college A, love it. Grants and scholarships, that student loan of $5,500 and they can work on campus. They weren't able to meet all of the need, but the grant and the scholarship section is really robust. College B, the same thing, but there's a parent loan built into that package to get to that $35,000 level. And College C, even worse, if I may say so. Parent loans are never guaranteed. It is an option for parents to try and borrow. Some loans are easier to obtain than others. All parent educational loans are generally built around credit and credit history, not necessarily ability to pay. So it's one of the tactics that some colleges who may not have, like College C, they probably have no endowment or no ability to give grants and scholarships to their applicants. So they're just loading up the financial aid package with loans. It's pure loan right there. So be aware and have your sons and daughters, have your students, or maybe your sons and daughters, if you've got kids going to college, just make sure they're aware of the individual elements of each financial aid award or notification. Jennifer, are there any questions about financial aid awards or the elements that go into those?
No,
Not yet. Okay.
Thank you.
Keep going. Thanks. Paying for college. This can be tricky, especially for you as guidance counselors, to talk about ways of financing. And you probably won't engage too deeply in these types of conversations, but just so you have some general knowledge, what we on the financial aid side of the table will be telling families when they come to open houses or in our publications and in our phone calls. Families first will say, well, okay, I might be able to cover my EFC, but I have unmet need. I'm not sure what to do about. Or even more likely, they'll say, I don't even know how to do my EFC. That FAFSA is a horrible form, and it's saying that I can afford $25,000 and I just can't. I don't know how to do it. So we have a conversation and we say, well, we look at financing in terms of three ways. You can either use your past income, your present income, or your future income. So past income is anything you have in a savings account or a college savings plan. Is there anything you can take out of that? Your son or daughter, do they have savings that they can access? Or were you able to set up a 529 plan, or a grandparent have some kind of educational investment for them? So they could take, maybe they've got, in this particular example, the family has to come up with $20,000. So they don't have that all in their savings account or their checking account. So they're going to take a portion of it out of their savings. And then in their present income, how much at the end of the month or the end of the year do they have after all they taken a salary, they pay their bills? Is there anything left at the end of the month to give towards college? And most colleges and universities offer payment plans, usually at a very minimal enrollment fee with no interest. And we encourage families to utilize these programs because it just makes it so much easier to finance rather than paying one lump sum in the fall and another lump sum in the spring. Break that amount out that they owe over the course of 10 or even 12 months. Some colleges do it by the semester. So Wheaton, for example, we have a 6, 5, and 4-month payment plan option each semester. Some families may want to do that for one term and not another. They might want to borrow, or they might know that they're going to have a nice tax refund in April so that they don't need a payment plan in that particular time. But back to the slide, this family is going to take a little bit of their balance and put it into a payment plan. So they've got 5,000 from savings, 5,000 they put into a payment plan, and then they're going to borrow the rest with their future income, and they're going to take an educational loan. So there are lots of pieces of the puzzle. We work with families not very often, especially at private colleges and universities. I have to say, not very often do families, are they able to write a check for $35,000 or sometimes even more for that education. So all of these options are available to them. Like I said, some families will use all three. Some will use one or two or a combination, and it can change from year to year too, depending on their circumstances. I mentioned how much I love students participating in this process. So I love when I get emails or letters or phone calls or visits from students themselves. It means that they are very involved in their own process. This is all about them. So I encourage families to have these really important conversations, and we call them kitchen table conversations. It's harder and harder to round up kids and parents all in one place. I think nightly dinner at the table at the same time is a thing of the past, but when you can, maybe on a Sunday afternoon or a random nighttime evening where nobody has any games or practices or meetings to go to, try to get talking. I think actually a subtitle to this slide could be on the way to the soccer tournament conversation in the car when you're traveling for all of these things that your students are doing. But you encourage families to have these hard conversations. We do have families that say, I'm going to send my kid to a private college because that's been their dream, that's been my dream, and there's nothing that can stop me. And we have to gently say, well, something might be able to stop you, and that is not being able to afford it. So it's not the end of the world. There are so many other options that families can utilize. Community college is a wonderful way for students, especially students who don't know what they want to study. You guys hear it every day. You have students marching into your office saying, I'm going to be a doctor. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you are confident that they are, and they get to school, they go to a college, and then all of a sudden they take an art history class and they want to switch gears. Moms and dads, I tell them all the time that it's okay if their students go into college as an undecided student. My 2 children, my last one is a senior in college now, finally, and he went in undecided. He still didn't know until he had to declare his sophomore year, and that's fine, but he was troubled by most of his friends. Almost all of his friends knew they wanted to do business, they wanted to be a lawyer, they wanted to be a doctor, they wanted to be a vet. And he didn't know, and I was fine with that, and he's fine with that. And now he's got a major that he loves, and it all worked out. But some families don't want to invest in a year or two of college if their students don't know what they want to do. So community college is a really great way, a cheap way to get college credits out of the way and then transfer to a more expensive university or college. Families also need to think about, if there's one child that they're going to be financing, or if there are 10 children that they have to finance, and usually it's somewhere in between. They're trying to balance, do I let one child go to a private school and then we exhaust all our resources and then my other child isn't able to? They've got to weigh that. It's not, it's not 1 year at a time. It's really, we're helping them to look at the big picture. It's important that these families or the students know how much they are comfortable in borrowing. What is their indebtedness going to be when they leave college? First, there's the undergraduate degree, but many of these students are going on to grad school, and the loans are even more plentiful in grad school than there are in undergrad. So how much are they willing to take on? How much are they willing or able to pay back when it comes time for repayment? Do they want to be able to move out of their parents' homes? Do they want to be able to get an apartment in a city and have a lifestyle that enables them to have a social life? Or do they, is it worth it to them to graduate and have $200, $300, $400, $600 loan payment afterwards? So all these questions are really hard questions, but it needs to start early, right as the college career is beginning. Credit scores, families need to know, or parents need to know, if they are able, if they're willing to borrow, if they would be able to borrow. Sometimes students are just, they might take for granted that their parents will just want to borrow loans when their parents may already be paying back their own. They're probably still paying back their student loans, or maybe loans for another child, or consumer debt, or whatever it is that prohibits them from having to borrow. So these are questions that are so important that families have with each other. Jennifer, was there a question?
Yes, we had a great question come in around net price calculators, to go back. So do you have any quick tips for students and families to estimate that non-need aid that they might get from individual colleges? Because many of the net price calculators don't include that merit aid, the merit calculations in the formula.
So that is a tough one. The net price calculators that I have seen actually do try to incorporate that in, but I think depending on the college, they don't want to allow a student to just willy-nilly enter their GPA or their rank in class. So that's why they're not including the merit. A call to the admission office is absolutely critical in this case, where you can ask, or the students can ask, what's the criteria that you're awarding on this year? Is it based on first come, first serve? Is it based on my GPA? Is it based on my cumulative transcript of the amount of AP courses that I've taken? Other types of, especially if it's musical or athletics, certainly if a student is recruited, that's not going to show up on a net price calculator. But if a student is talented in the arts, let's say, or graphic arts, the admission office may say, well, we have our professors in the art department help us select our merit scholarships based on ability. So it's, if you do, or if your family does encounter a net price calculator that doesn't include the merit, call to the admission office is really a simple way to see if they can help out with that.
Great. Thank you, Susan.
I hope that's helpful.
No, good. That was a tough one.
Let's see. So again, in talking with families, having this kitchen table or car ride discussions, there are options for them where students can apply or attend a community college, and then they're guaranteed admission to a four-year public. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it makes it a lot more affordable and takes a little bit of the stress away for both the application process and the financing process. And you can learn more about that if you don't know about it already on mass.edu, the mass transfer section. And then tuition breaks mean that students who want to go to an out-of-state school may get the in-state rate if the program that they're taking is not available in Massachusetts. So we have families that apply to schools in Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, and the particular program that they want to study isn't available here. So they do get that in-state break, even though they're going out of state. Excuse me. I apologize. Free resources. Everybody loves free resources. I think it helps families know that there are resources out there. They do not have to pay a private consultant to help them through. I do get calls every year from businesses or counselors that have been hired by families to ask these questions that they are very capable of asking themselves. Even the forms, I've helped, well, when my kids were just starting to do the application process, our peer group, all of my families and friends were afraid to do the forms. And I gathered them all around one afternoon and I said, we're going to do our FAFSAs today. And we're not going to charge you any money. You could do it yourselves. Be helpful to the financial aid world when you're talking with your students, and encourage them to encourage their families to try and do this on their own. And if they're really stuck, then they can, it's certainly on their, it's their prerogative to hire help, but there's so many free resources out there, including FAFSA Day. Some of you may have hosted groups of financial aid administrators and MEFA folks at your cafeterias or libraries. And we want to help families fill out the FAFSA free of charge. And these events are held October, November, all the way through February. Usually we offer them in English and Spanish. FAFSAday.org is a great place for everybody to go and see when these events are taking place. The last few years we've done them virtually. Hope to eventually get back to them in person. There's nothing like sitting with a family at a computer terminal and just seeing their shoulders relax. Like, okay, we're going to go through these. And even though I'm answering all these questions all by myself, I have you right next to me, Susan, as reassurance. And that's really worth all the money in the world to me, that families are getting through the process and not having to pay extra money. EOCs are available all across the state where families can go and get information and get help in applying too. So really, I would encourage your families and your students to look for these free opportunities to fill out their forms.
So we did have another question come in, and I know we get this a lot at MEFA. So do you have some suggestions for undocumented students, so students without a social security number or a green card, to get financial aid?
Yeah, so this is such a tough question. Some colleges and universities are, they have a lot of resources, so they are up front and center with their abilities to fund students that are in the DACA program or are undocumented. Generally, those colleges have really big endowments, and they have a commitment that enables them to help these students. Other colleges aren't quite as fortunate or able to do that. So it's a case-by-case basis where these students can apply. And you as counselors, I guess, can do a little bit of homework in sort of having lists of colleges that are, I don't want to say DACA friendly necessarily, but we love DACA students here at Wheaton. We don't have the resources to give 100% financing to our students who aren't eligible for federal aid and state aid, but other colleges are. Community colleges sometimes are the way to go for students and families who may be in process of getting their citizenship ironed out or squared away, that will enable them to receive financial aid in the future. So by doing 1 or 2 credits at a time, just to keep their educational momentum going, that's the way to go for them. It really does depend. And at financial aid administrators, we try not to answer every single question as it depends, but sometimes we have to do it that way. So I hope that's helpful. I didn't have any real definite answers like, oh my God, there's this wonderful, awesome DACA scholarship that I know of that's available for everyone. maybe eventually we'll get there, but we're not quite there yet. So your seniors, you want to make sure they stay on track. You want to make sure their families are understanding what is happening in what month. Junior year is really, you've probably already spoken with your juniors about visiting colleges and figuring out what part of the country they want to be in and what kinds of colleges they want to apply to. They may be taking SATs. They're probably taking SATs if their colleges require that. That essay English class is a great place for them to be starting those college essays, experimenting with different prompts and styles of writing. In the senior year, right now, they might take the SAT again. They should be talking with you guys and making sure that you are aware of their deadlines. I am hoping that you are able to discourage your students from telling you the night before they have an application due tomorrow. Hopefully many of you have policies that prohibit that, but it always is amazing to me, even at the college level, when we have students that come to our office and say, you know, Ms. Beard, can I have this scholarship application. Can you fill it out? Sure, I'd be happy to do that. When is it due? Oh, midnight tonight. I'm so sorry. They're doing that even when they're in college, but hopefully at the high school level, they're getting a little bit better at giving you adequate time to fill out your recommendations and do their paperwork, help them with their paperwork. In the wintertime is when all these applications are flying off the desks and electronically being submitted. Encourage your students to be applying for private scholarships. Mid-year grades are sometimes required or sent in to the colleges. And then the spring is when they're finding out. Actually, in the winter and spring, more and more colleges are going earlier and earlier, and not just necessarily the early decisions or the early action decisions, but even the regular decisions are being sent out earlier than traditional April and March. Everybody's trying to compete with everybody else for their students. So the spring is when decisions are made, applications are brought to the ending or the conclusion. MEFA has wonderful webinars and seminars to attend for families to help them figure out, now that they've applied and gotten through that process, how are they going to pay? What are their options? And then, of course, most colleges, as you all know, have until May 1st for their students to decide if they want to enroll. Make sure you also encourage your students to tell the colleges where they're not enrolling. Just make sure they say, thanks, but I'm going somewhere else. We do, and you've probably seen students receiving surveys from colleges that say, thank you for applying to Wheaton. We just need to know if you're not enrolling, why and where you're going. These surveys are super important and helpful for colleges all over the country to better their programs and understand the behaviors of 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And so whatever you can do to encourage your students to complete surveys. I know the last thing they want to do is look at their email now. Colleges are even going to TikTok to put out their surveys that way. And, you know, we're trying to get them wherever they'll meet us. But please encourage them to fill out anything that colleges are sending their way, because it's super helpful. So you have students who are on the ball, students who might need to get a little prompt to get on the ball, but you can encourage them to get their FSA IDs if they're going to be financial aid applicants. Make sure they get that spreadsheet that I spoke about. That tool on MEFA is really helpful to have them get organized, and just to list all the colleges that they want to go to, the deadlines that they have, and then the application materials that are required. Posts and blogs are good, obviously, to read. References, the net price calculator is really, really super important and helpful, I think, for families as they're applying. But, you know, in the next couple of months, things are going to ramp up. It seems like we just got back. Well, we just started school after a nice hot summer, but now the students are really, they need to kick into gear and figure out what they want to do in terms of plans and deadlines. So let's see. Oh, connect with us. Connect with MEFA on social media. We're all over, as you can see. And I'm gonna ask if there are any more questions. There are a few good ones throughout, but Jennifer, are there any more?
No, we don't have any lingering questions. We
Wonderful.
tackled them all. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Well, I would like to say thank you. It just came in a little bit over an hour. So thank you for those of you who stayed with us throughout the whole time. I hope that you found at least 1 or 2 things helpful, maybe 3 or 4 things. If there are questions afterwards, please reach out to me. I'm at Wheaton College. MEFA, certainly send emails, phone calls. We're happy to help. And really can't thank you all enough for tuning in and being the conduit to your students from the financial aid world, and hopefully resulting in very good and generous financial aid packages for your families. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer, for having me.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for leading the session, Susan. So much valuable information. So
Great.
we thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Have a great day and a great year to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.